Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us in the world. Welcome to DevOps Summit Canada 2022. I'm Savinder Puri, and it's my absolute pleasure to host this panel today. Today, we'll be discussing a very interesting topic on DevOps metrics. Before we get started, let's take a popcorn approach to the introduction. I'll begin by introducing myself. I've been around for about 20 odd years in the trenches. I'm an ambassador at DevOps Institute and CDF. I'm an evangelist at a bank in Eastern Europe. I've managed to write a book on how to build a career in DevOps, which is available on Amazon worldwide. And I also just started a small YouTube channel that focuses on DevOps and spirituality and how you can combine these two. So that's a bit of my introduction. And Garima, if I can pass it on to you for your introduction, please, and then we can go around the room.
Thank you, Savinder. I'm Garima Bajpayee. I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada. People who know me by Canada DevOps Community of Practice. Here we have multiple chapters: Ottawa, Montreal, Edmonton, Toronto, Atlantic provinces with 1,300 plus leadership contributors. I'm also the chair for the ambassador program at Continuous Delivery Foundation. I'm associated with DevOps Institute since a long time. I've contributed to their courses, skill books, and also active participant in their events. I lead the Canada chapter for DevOps Institute as well. And you will see me speaking at different forums, different events on DevOps and beyond. So that's me, Garima. I will pass it on to Brian.
Yeah, I'm Brian Fenster. I'm a value stream architect for Defense Unicorns. I've been a software engineer for 26 plus years. I founded the DevOps Dojo at Walmart when I worked there. I'm a board advisor for the Value Stream Management Consortium and one of the maintainers of minimumcd.org. Manas?
All right.
Hi, Brian. Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Manas Shom. I am a DevOps consultant and an evangelist. I work in Tata Consultancy Services, and I, along with one of my colleagues, we co-founded the DevOps chapter to serve all the banking and financial services customers in my company. And I am an author. I've co-authored the book Assessing DevOps, and I hold a patent and being a thought leader, speaking in forums. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, over to Jay, please.
Jay, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. So myself, Jay Shah. I work for E&Y as a senior cybersecurity consultant, specifically in DevSecOps and DevOps. I have bachelor's and master's degree. I've been currently staying in Toronto, Canada, and been in the US for past 5 years. With that, I'm also the community lead and chapter lead for Canada DevOps Community of Practice, plus ambassador for various organizations such as Linux Foundation, Continuous Delivery Foundation, and DevOps Institute, and also a section member for IEEE. And I'm also a researcher and have published some of the white papers around open source, continuous delivery, microservices, and DevOps. And I'm also been a part-time faculty advisor previously at my university.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Jay. So now that we want to start talking about metrics, I want to begin by taking all of you a couple of years back in your careers, maybe 5, 10, 15 years, as far as back as you want to go, right? And I want to dig your brains on what were your thoughts on measurement and metrics at that time, and how do you approach metrics now? So Brian, if I could start from you, probably, dig into your days at Walmart and, tell us how you would approach metrics about 5, 10 years back. And what's your thought when you get into an organization and you start talking about metrics? What's changed?
So we really didn't measure anything, and that really bit us. When we started piloting CD and supply chain, we didn't have any way to measure before and after. We didn't really focus on it. We were just focusing on how do we improve. And the outcome of that, though, was that when leadership in the area changed, and we didn't have any way to prove that what we did was better. And so I immediately started trying to dig into how do we measure these things so that we can maintain the improvement and not have people just use opinions.
Sure, that makes sense. Manas, I want to also dig into your experience. I'm sure you worked with multiple banks all across, how did you approach metrics back in the day and how do you approach them now?
Right. So I'll give a different perspective. Now, I started around more than 24 years back, my career, and I went, I was working for a telecom company as part of TCS, but then my customer was a telecom company. Now, I was in application maintenance and support, and there we started with SLAs. So we had SLAs defined against certain SLOs. Like here, it's a different relationship. I am working in a vendor company, which is serving a customer. Now, in this case, the customer obviously defines what we term as SLOs today, right? The service level objectives. Now, those times, 1998 and all, there was no, we don't know about the term SLO. Now, they talked about those targets, the thresholds that has to be reached, and from a compliance perspective, and we defined our SLAs as part of the contract that TCS had, right? So your service level agreements were certain contractual terms that says that, okay, if you're meeting SLOs, you get XYZ. If you don't meet the SLOs, then you essentially don't get those XYZs. Okay, so that was the first kind of metrication that I found was coming in a very informal manner. And later as we moved across different other customers, I was looking at media and information services customers. I was looking at BFSI that time as well, a number of customers there. A lot of, when I looked at retail, now it started varying with the industries. When I looked at retail, it was customer dynamics that was at play. So I started looking at business metrics that way in a certain manner. Okay, that was back in sometime around 2003, 4, 5 kind of a time frame.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, and retail is a very fast moving kind of a vertical. So what happened was they were looking at customer dynamics, okay, and they were looking at how fast the customer wants certain products to be launched, and accordingly how fast we can deliver those products. So that was a very informal way. There was no DevOps, nothing, but very informal way to actually address the customer problem of getting things faster. But that was retail. It was not this problem was not in banking that time, not with any other industry. Okay, energy, utilities, all those companies were very lethargic in that manner. So I was not finding any metrics coming up. What I did find in retail, banking, financial services, as far as it was all on premise, no concept of cloud, everything was safe, secure. No metrics actually mattered that time. Okay, and as we moved towards sometime around 2011, 12, and the years in which Patrick started talking about DevOps with a lot of other different people. I didn't know Patrick that time. But then the movement started, Agile came in. Agile came back in 2001, but then the concepts came in. It was getting more adopted by different industry verticals. By that time, I was already mostly with banking and insurance organizations. They were starting to adopt Agile and the connected metrics, the metrics that actually defined Agile. But then things started to be turning fragile for a lot of customers instead of Agile. So, yeah, and then obviously things mature. So this is how I saw metrics evolving at that time.
Makes sense. Manas, you brought about a very interesting point, difference in the way a retailer would measure things versus how a bank would measure things. So industry specific variations also, right? So the other thing I want to talk about is how does an organization even begin to decide, what to measure, right? What are the objectives to measure? Because once I would imagine that is fixed, then you start defining which metrics will match that objective, right? Definitely. But how does an organization go about deciding the what category, what are the metrics to focus on? And then from there you define, okay, then for that objective, these are the maybe 3 or 4 metrics that we should measure. So any thoughts on that?
Right. So when we looked at these industries, it definitely, what business started measuring, that actually impacted what IT actually had to measure. If business starts measuring velocity or time to market in terms of how fast your customers are being catered to a certain change, then obviously the IT has to look at, if I have to roll out an application in my environment, how fast that can be done. So it was important for retail to actually give that push. But when it came to somebody else, when it came to banking, that time all on premise, nothing really mattered. But then because customers also were not so demanding when it came to banking at a certain stage, at least if you looked at markets like India, okay. But then what happened was suddenly things went on to cloud, and and banks were already so concerned about how secure is the data there. So that triggers the security of data from a business perspective first, and then it boils down to IT saying that, okay, how do we make that data secure? Okay, so there are business decisions actually that has driven IT decisions, because if I quote from Yuval Noah Harari's Homo sapiens, the way humans evolved, right? If you look at the evolution, a certain enterprising nature of human beings running a business actually drives how technology runs and what it measures, right? It's from the ancient days, and that is what we also see in the current business scenario.
Sure.
That would be
Brian, if you can pick on you, and then Jay, I'll like to get your perspective also. You've been quiet for a while. So Brian, what's your thought? How does an organization decide what to measure, and then that kind of drives the metrics? How does an organization go about it?
I mean, top level, what's the value the organization is trying to deliver? We need to be measuring against our business goals. We are trying to deliver this value, define what that value is, and then define a set of measures to decide if we're delivering that value. But then also, metrics around how do we do that more effectively? Because that impacts value as well. If it costs us a lot of money to deliver that value, it could be that we go out of business trying to get it done. So we need to improve efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability of delivering that value. We need to measure all of those things.
Yeah. That's. I have a bunch of questions there, but I'll go to Jay first before I ask those. Jay, what's your thought?
Rightly, like Ryan and Manas mentioned about metrics, but adding like bunch of other things is right. The problem with metrics is, again, like, be it like on-premises data centers or cloud. The problem is really like the bottom level people are not in alignment with the top leadership team. Like, even though we have a bunch of tools around, like, measuring, like Datadog or maybe Azure or AWS or whatever we have, all this SaaS, TaaS, whatever the monitoring tools are there, like Splunk, for example, or whatever. But the thing is, like, we have, one is the budgeting issues, second is the licensing, subscriptions, and third, even if the like different teams like development team or the operations team, they do measure metrics, but they are not getting reported to the senior leadership team. So in terms of like, if they calculate like mean time to recover or mean time to failure, or all those DORA metrics, or all those DevOps metrics, we say from in terms of CALM's perspective, culture, automation, measurement, lean, and sharing. All those are getting lost. They like, even like when I or myself or with other colleagues have spoken to like bunch of clients or customers, or even when we research a lot, there is a lot of gaps between tracking the metrics. No centralized dashboarding capabilities are there. Even if like like project milestones or vision of that application, how we want to roll out the changes very frequently, right? So all those are not getting tracked or traced somewhere. So that is something a lot of organizations are still facing problems, though they have moved to cloud, but they are lost with so many tools usage. They have lost. There is a gap between the lower team to the upper high management team. So that's where I see still metrics it's the main thing, but again having that repo, again coming from traditional to modern silos, is still somewhere there are many challenges still coming up.
I understand. And great point, Jay, on the tooling. We'll come to tooling in a bit, but before that, I want to stay a little bit longer on the philosophy of metrics. And you did mention DORA, and I was sure somebody in this forum would talk about that, because that's the default, by de facto metrics that we talk about. So Brian and then Garima, I want to get your thoughts on this. Is DORA the right metrics for every enterprise? Can any enterprise under the sun just pick up DORA and start working with it? Or is there more to it?
Well, I mean, it's just one layer. I mean, DORA metrics are really focused around continuous delivery, because there's a high correlation between continuous delivery and high performing organizations. The problem that I see with DORA metrics is, number one, people don't understand what they mean because they don't actually read the book that talks about it. But they also just look just at that instead of, they set goals around DORA metrics. They do all sorts of terrible things. But also the DORA metrics themselves, you can't use them verbatim effectively in my experience. They're a guideline for that. I mean, they send you on a direction of we should be measuring these kinds of things. But I've seen people jump through hoops trying to measure change fail rate and tie a failure to a specific change and measure those things. That's not really useful for what we're trying to discover. And even the DORA group themselves is looking at MTTR and saying, we're not finding a high correlation between that and really performance when we really try to do it for, and instrument it. And so what else can we look at instead? And so, I think people really need to dig in and understand what it is they're trying to accomplish when they're looking at DORA metrics. We're trying to improve our ability to deliver high quality things in smaller batches more frequently to get faster feedback.
Yeah. Garima, your thoughts on this?
Yes, and I will start from the basics. Let's take a few steps back. A lot has been said over here about matrices. So let me, from my experience, define when we start to use matrices. There are essentially 4 things which we do. Obviously, there can be many more, but I can highlight these 4 things. Either you want to quantify, the state of nation. You want to kind of put down some tracking of whatever you're doing. I'm not talking about operational or business or strategic or tactical. Whatever your matrices you put forward, they are for quantifying, for tracking. And then when your organization gets matured, or the matrices adoption get matured, you can use it for assessment and comparison. Right? So now coming back to your question about DORA matrices, and I will not focus too much on DORA. There are other matrices as well. But, when you talk about these matrices, which are de facto standards, as Brian mentioned, you need to kind of obviously question the why, and the why for people, for different persona types will be different. There is a functional silo which is existing when you're measuring things. You talk to a business person, DORA matrices would probably be not the right kind of measurement or matrices for these kind of people, because they will talk about NPS. They will talk about lead generation, lead conversion. So these kind of matrices are more suitable for business stakeholders. So if you're going to a CIO or executive board meeting, probably you'll have to do that translation yourself. And that is where I think we can also focus on the later questions, that how do we build that bridge, where we are talking to different types of stakeholders at an executive level. Why, taking those matrices wouldn't make any sense if we are not connecting the dots here. For operational organizations, as Manas mentioned, the organizations which are more driven from SLO or SLI or SLA perspective, again, that bridge has to be made. 10 deployments a day or 150 deployments a day, that cannot be translated into an SLO and SLO in a contract. So how do you bridge that gap? And that is where I think it explains a lot that why these matrices cannot be used as de facto in every situation. Let's give back the forum to you, Savinder. You have more questions on this. We'll come back to these topics and dig more deeper into what are the to-do list when we talk about matrices and what needs to be done in 2023 and beyond.
No, great answer, Garima. And I love that quantify, track, assess, and compare. I love that framework. Right? So I want to talk a little bit. You said, we shouldn't look at just hundreds of deployments or MTTR of, 3 nanoseconds and stuff like that. Right. So in the experience of the panel here, have you heard about organizations which went about this metrics rampage, selected the wrong set of metrics, and then they didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver? Do we know of some anti-patterns? Without taking obviously any names, can we talk about a little bit about that? What's the fallout of effectively selecting a wrong metric, if I can call it that? Brian, you seem to be itching to answer that one.
I've talked to many organizations. I think the most common outcome is people kind of shrug and say, "What does this mean? You threw metrics at us, so what?" I have seen, like I said, metrics being set as goals, and someone said, "Oh, we want to deploy more frequently," and then they don't also have some guardrails around quality, and then things start blowing up. I've seen organizations decide that they're mature or immature based solely on these metrics. And that's, you don't become a high performing organization because you have good DORA metrics. You become a high performing organization because you serve your customers better. You really need to focus on that. I've haven't heard anybody report going off the rails entirely. I've seen areas do that in organizations, where it's literally been the only focus is how do we improve DORA metrics. But not cause massive disasters. Usually it's just, we don't know what to do with this. And so you need to start with what it is we're trying to do, which is we're trying to improve the effectiveness of product development and using these as health indicators for what we're doing to remove waste from that flow.
Okay. Yeah. I think that makes sense. So basically,
I will try to add something here, and I think this is a great question, by the way. Matrices have consequences, and I'll explain to you in a layman language. If, let's say, you start measuring doctors with the number of lives they save, what is the consequence of that? Just think about it. And, matrices create bias because if you are putting together some kind of a solution or a transformation in place with the perspective that this works for the industry, so you leave your brainstorming behind. That room for creativity is gone, and that is where I think I have more or less some problems with, coming with de facto standards. I think one example I can give you is I was discussing with one of the premium organization. They wanted to put observability in place. So they actually took some matrices which are industry standards and said, this is how we will put a solution for observability in place. And this itself creates a problem because to solve one problem, you're generating number of other problems. Your matrices will have consequence, it will have bias, it will have too many parameters which you start measuring from the beginning, because and that would not help you. That will not bring you the business outcomes you are needing as an organization. What is your minimum viable metrics? Start with that and then build upon it. So I'll stop here.
No, and I'll add on that and I'll shut up. I think it's very important to have observability into what we're doing so that we can find out when things are going wrong. But anytime we establish any metric, we have to think, to your point, Garima, what can go wrong? Because we're measuring people. It's a complex endeavor. We will change behavior as soon as we start measuring something. And so you have to have other measures in place to identify that we're not going off the rails with this, that we have these guardrail metrics in place to make sure that we're not creating these perverse incentives.
Yeah.
I would just add like one
Go ahead.
couple of things. So like rightly everyone mentioned, Brian and Karima, that that there are times when we initially calculate when we have to roll out a couple of projects or maybe like web application, simple web application as well. Then like where tons of users are there, tons of tracking or traffic will be flowing to and fro. Yesterday, social media like Instagram went down, so that there might be times what metrics they have failed, it has to be maybe a load balancer or maybe another server should instantly come up, but that didn't work out. It took a couple of hours to bring the application back up, like mean time of recover wasn't it wasn't like not even in like nanosecond. It took them minutes to bring that up. So some of the time is that when project is rolled off, the mission, vision, and objectives change, and again it's on the development team, operations team, how effectively they can bring it up. A few months back in Canada, like Rogers was down for 2 days. So again, like some of the, like for them it took almost like more than 48 hours to bring the network back up and rolling, and it affected like thousands of lakhs of customers, several losses, and again like several impacts were happened. So it's again coming up with observability, right strategy, decision making, and again leveraging the best development, operations, and different teams, and having the same set of change management in place.
Yep, I agree, and there's a whole lot to unpack. We can probably go for the next 48 hours. We've spoken about minimal viable metrics. We've spoken about creativity in metrics, human impact of metrics, observability. But I want to bundle all of this together and then go to Manas and get your experience on how do metrics change as an organization matures in its DevOps journey, right? I'm sure some things in your experience you would have seen, right? So right. Manas, what's your take on that?
Yeah, see, when you talked about DORA, what I felt is DORA is good to start with, and then DORA becomes bad, right? So what happens is when you are a kid, right? You first get to write A, B, C, D, and then you start forming those words. Okay, BAD is bad, GOOD is good. Now, that you are being put into a structure, and once you have a good control of that structure, then you start thinking about that structure, whether it suits me. Okay. And then you start breaking that structure into your own way. And that is what the creativity actually Karima was talking about. So at a certain stage, when an organization starts to look at what metrics should be defined, what kind of metrics can be taken out. When I'm looking at an organization, business is very clear of what kind of metrics the business wants to know. The kind of metrics that you go and talk to the CXOs in those organizations. But when it comes to IT, okay, I am looking at IT part of these organizations. They don't yet know what metrics actually is able to map to the right metrics to on the business side. And that is where DORA comes to help. You pick up those 4 or 5 DORA metrics, the key metrics that DORA defines. You look at, release frequency. You look at lead time to change as one of my metrics that I can pursue, and you start pursuing it, and suddenly you feel you don't actually require 20 to 30,000 deploys a day that Amazon needs, right? So then you start getting creative. Okay, I don't really need that kind of a time to change or so many deployments per day, but what I may need is a little something else, which can be a derivation of that metrics in a certain manner, or it can be an entirely new metrics. And then you get all the people on board and start brainstorming what metrics is now relevant for your IT. But that happens when you more or less know how DORA works. Okay, DORA gives a structure, an initial structure. And then as the organization matures from, say, a very new kind of a organization in terms of defining metrics to somebody who can think about their own metrics, then is the time when you start people coming in and then brainstorm and get those metrics right. Okay, this is what I've seen has to happen. And then suddenly what happens is, now, for example, when we look at DevSecOps, now, when people looked at traditional DevOps metrics, starting with DORA and then forming their own set of metrics, looking at time to market as one of the primary things that needs to be done, certainly organizations like banking, they started to look at security as a very important aspect. Till that time, nobody was actually talking of security metrics. And that's why they started putting security metrics in between. And then we got this term DevSecOps from Dr. Topopal in Capital One, right? And then once these things were going on fine, then somebody said, okay, I think we need to look more onto reliability. And that's another set of creativity that started coming in. So it's an evolution of creativity, creative thinking of a bunch of people in the organization in the IT. So then people looked at reliability. How reliable are my pipelines? Okay, my applications are going on fine. There are so many features I'm pushing out, but there is something to do with reliability, and that's where reliability metrics came into being. Google started publishing papers on SRE, site reliability engineering. But then when I looked at banking services, we were not actually looking at site reliability as the acronym being SRE. We modified it to service reliability engineering.
Service reliability.
Okay, because site means a lot when you are talking of clusters and racks that Google kind of manages. Okay, but then when it comes to a bank who is already using some other cloud service provider, they don't actually are managing the clusters and racks. They get creative, saying that, okay, now I am defining SRE not as site reliability engineering, but it's more of service reliability.
That's a great answer. Yeah, that's a great answer, Manas. Sorry, I have to cut you because we're short on time. Sorry about that.
Savinder.
That's a great answer. You've covered the entire spectrum of metrics. Now, something allied to that is the DevOps assessment model. So what I wanted to ask is, formal DevOps assessment, like you used to do an ITIL assessment or a CMMI assessment, in 2022, is DevOps assessment dead, or is there still value in doing DevOps assessment for an organization?
I can take that one. Brian and Manas and Garima can add on. I wouldn't say like DevOps maturity model assessments is dead. It's like it's changing, it's evolving, like with different frameworks, different processes, different maturity models. Like we have like now various frameworks, like NIST, OWASP, Atlas, and then the Phoenix project, the DevOps handbook, all have come together and evolved with different strategies, coming up what is maturity model. Like if any organization wants to implement DevOps, if they don't have everyone knows this, development, operations, QA, everyone are working in traditional silos, then a DevOps engineer will be there, will bridge the gap. But with that, now it's again the tooling, it's again with the security, with monitoring, with SREs, with the all the C-level are getting involved, with the change management coming into perspective, how frequently we want to roll out. Then there is a CAB meetings, CAB advisors, and bunch of things are coming up. So I wouldn't. So that's why it's evolving with different frameworks. Like for example, one is the CALMS framework. It's culture, automation, measurement, lean, and sharing, which was written or discussed by Jin came in for DevOps handbook and with Atlas, and also suggested CALMS framework. Then there is another called as DevOps maturity model by US Defense Department. So they have a different structure of measuring capabilities. They have different ways of how this different pillars can be implemented in organization. Then NIST has a different one which says implemented security in maturity models called as BSIMM. So there are like different frameworks coming up into picture, but different processes, different practices, and all organizations trying to implement one of these in their teams, especially to start up with a small application, a small project, to see like it's and again with this the roles and duties of all the engineers and the respective candidate members also changing. Not only like DevOps person has to have all the abilities, right? It's a work of development also. Developers should know security. They have to leverage different security tools like code coverage, security application, static application security tooling, or dynamic application security testing. So all this, they have to start from the lower ground level. When they are planning for assessments, they are planning for initiating a project plan, the Infinity DevOps loop, which we have. It's not the work of DevOps, it's the work of all the team members who are the part of this journey.
Yeah, great point, Jay. Yeah, I think it's collaborative. So, okay. So, Brian, coming to you, DevOps assessment in 2022, is it valid? Is it dead?
It was never supposed to be a maturity model. I mean, that's never what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be trying to identify where there was constraints in the value stream. And this is one of the things that I challenge people on is, number one, people a lot of the times don't understand what DevOps means because it's not dev and ops. It's how we operate as an organization to improve the flow of delivery through the organization to better serve the end users. It's value stream improvement. And so you shouldn't be using a maturity model. You should be identifying where the constraints in the flow are for delivery and fixing those things, aligning the teams around the supply chain of communication so that we can get value delivered for the product we're trying to build. And any sort of assessment you should be doing should be around, okay, where do we have too many handoffs? Where are we batching up code as inventory waste? How do we flow this information more smoothly through the organization? And you should never look at it as a maturity model. You should always be looking at it as, okay, there's something we can improve. What do we improve next? What's the highest priority to improve in the flow?
Sure. So it's more of, drawing out the value chain, figuring out where the blockers are and removing impediments and removing them.
And continually assessing that,
assessing. Yeah. Okay. Garima, your thoughts on this? You're on mute.
I think from a leadership standpoint, everything what has been said, I agree to that. One thing which I will highlight is that as a strategic leader who's trying to transform an organization for the next decade, what guidance I require. So there are primarily 4 things. And I think we have talked about it in different forums. So when the first thing is the individual needs. So what is that individual need for upskilling, for role change, for redesigning, rewriting the roles in the organization at an individual level? Yeah. Then it comes to teams. So what should be my team structures in order to ensure that I take that DevOps thinking and remove the constraints and blockers and try to kind of implement a value stream approach? The third part of this, as a leader, I would also look for guidance, how my organization should operate. How can I break that functional silos which we have created for business, strategic, tactical, operational, business lines. And the fourth aspect is business itself. What are we trying to achieve? And our business models are aligned to our DevOps thinking. When you take this approach of cloud providers, you see around what they have done is at the end of the day, they've transformed their business model. They've transformed into an organization which has created a marketplace, which has given co-creation opportunities, which has a pay-as-you-go subscription-based model. So at the end of the day, that transformation which we are doing at the other end should support this from a business perspective. So these are the 4 things which I, from a leadership perspective, look for guidance. And if there are matrices who can provide that guidance, or if there are frameworks or there are assessment models which can direct me to the right direction, I think I will be keen to look at it and try to adopt and implement it. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Yep, that's a great answer, Garima. And I think we have to wrap up things now. We are closing on time. So one final message, 30 seconds each. What's your message to a C-level person who's watching this talk? One guidance to them if they are in the process of redefining their metrics or re-looking at it. What's the one guidance you want to give to them?
So for me, it's don't blindly apply metrics you heard about at a conference once. Yeah. What are our business goals? How do we measure that? And what's the stack of metrics from business goal all the way down to how teams are operating that we can measure so that we can more effectively deliver against those business goals?
Okay. Makes sense. Manas?
One thing that I would like to talk about to the CXO level is when you look at anything to do with DevOps, metrics, enterprise architecture of your organization, look at your business operating model, look at what actually gives value to your business operating model, right? And then you come down, look at the different layers of business, application, data, technology, etc., 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 and derive those metrics that are aligned to your business operating model. Okay, it cannot just exist in isolation, or IT is not the person to decide on what metrics is always suitable. There has to be a guidance from the business, and that is where business needs to help IT to help itself. That is how I would put it.
That's a great point. Collaboration with business, because ultimately it's the business that we are running, right?
Right.
All right, Jay, what's your thought?
Yeah, rightly said by Brian and Manas that business and tech should go hand in hand together, and there shouldn't be like a lot of gaps between the low underlying team and the upper leadership team. They have to think from tech perspective as well, not just like business. They have to also think how the development operations and SREs are working together collaboratively, and also thinking that XYZ reason my application or my system is down, how immediately I should bring that up. So from that perspective, if you think, then the process would be like much easier, and the things will work out faster.
Yeah. Okay.
And I
what I
would
would like to sorry, go ahead.
Real quick. Oh, I'm sorry, Graham.
Sure.
Stop measuring individual productivity. Just stop it. It destroys teamwork and destroys your business goals.
Yes, you stole my thunder. I had written that down.
So sorry. It's just a pet peeve of mine.
So what I had written was an extension of that, and that was, don't compare metrics within the organization, one team versus the other team, which is an extension of what you said. The only other thing I want to say is, learn from others, create your own. Because in all probability, you are not a Facebook, you're not a Google, you have your own set of issues, you have your own set of challenges, you have your own set of business priorities. So get inspired from everybody, but create your own. Garima,
one liner which I actually very liked from you, which you said the other day, that don't Spotify a bank. You can't. So I think look at what matters to you, where your business objectives are aligned, focus on outcome. And the most important thing, your matrices should close the alignment gaps between business and IT, not widen them.
Not widen them. Yeah. That's wise thought. And I think on that thought, let's close this discussion. Thank you, everybody. It was a great talk, and thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.